Hopefully I've given, you're in trouble now.
Looks like you're the only subject today.
You are the subject. Okay. Do you think he's back there ready?
Yeah.
Okay. Good side. Good evening. I'm calling to order the Keizer Traffic Safety, Bikeways, and Pedestrian Committee meeting for Thursday, October 17th, 2024. Has everybody had a chance to look at the minutes from last meeting?
I move we accept the minutes of September 19th.
Do I hear a second?
I had a amendment I wanted to suggest in the changes, just to make it clearer.
Ken and Kathy, or Ken and Kathy Keating.
There we
I
go.
have this turned off.
On page 2, last paragraph on the bottom, under the project spreadsheet review, I wanted to just clarify from last meeting that I would recommend that it would read, David Philbrick shared that he rides the Chemawa bike lane west and feels the intersection at River Road is safe. And that the next sentence would read, Lock Haven going west at McLeod, comma, where it goes into a single lane, and continues. It just basically clarifies what I was trying to say at the time.
Since you seconded it, do I have a motion to
I
amend?
move we amend the motion.
Amend the minutes. I second that we
Is that
amend the
right?
minutes.
What- To approve the minutes with the correction as noted.
I would second that.
Okay. All in favor?
Aye.
The minutes are approved for the September meeting. At this time, we always leave time for appearance of interested persons to talk about any item that is not on our agenda. Is there anybody here tonight? Nope. Moving on, new business. We have a distinguished person here tonight to talk with us. The planning director, Shane Witham, will be answering our members' questions. And I think you've gotten an attachment with some of those questions. I have to add that Shane has come to our group neighborhood association meetings and has been very helpful in talking to us about some of the land use issues that neighborhood associations have. So with that, Shane.
Thank you, Chair Sangster and committee members. Thanks for having me. So yeah, I was gonna kind of talk through a little bit. I gotta like kind of pause just for a second. I don't think I've ever been anywhere in my life where someone has introduced me as distinguished. So thank you for that. That just normally is not a descriptor of Shane. But you know, really what I was hoping is for it to be very informal. I know I had heard some months back the committee had some questions about planning and how it interacts and some different things. And the questions that you submitted here, we'll just kind of walk through them if that's okay. But feel free, if you have questions along the way, I'm a pretty informal guy, so feel free to interrupt me, catch me. Because really, you know, the point of me being here is to try to bring some clarity where you do have questions. And then if there are specific concerns that the committee has, that's also something that I'd like to hear and then figure out, okay, what's a path to, or a process that we need to do to address those things or to consider those things. In the questions, I think Chair Saldivar had submitted and asked questions about Keizer Station. Basically, is it going as it was planned? And is the traffic getting worse? And do we need to be concerned? Kind of some general things. What I would say to that, well, I will also commend you. I told committee member Philbrick beforehand, hey, nobody gave me any softball questions in this list. There were not any easy yes or no's. So in this one, I mean, I would jokingly respond, yes, it's going as planned. Do we have any concerns? Nah, we're good. But that's clearly tongue in cheek. with the Keizer station, it was a large process from more than 20 years ago. I've been around. I was around. I wasn't super involved with the initial stages of Keizer Station. I've been much more involved in the last 10 to 15 years there. But basically, it was an area that was a huge swath of land that got a big change to the comprehensive plan and zoning designations, which kind of regulates what land can be used for, which then the inception of the shopping center came. But before that happened, there was a master planning process that had to be gone through. For the Keizer Station is broken down into basically Area A, which is where Lowe's, Target, and the bulk of Keizer Station is. Area B, which is where the transit center is and the vacant land that's mostly owned by the city. Area C, which is the area where Bonaventure and the new, well, they're not that new anymore, but the larger apartment complexes, and then a whole bunch of houses in there. That's all part of what we call Area C. And then Area D would be where the water tower is, Chick-fil-A, 7-Eleven, and the 2 new buildings that are starting to go up. And that's land owned by the tribes. And so each of the sub areas had a master plan that was done for a master site plan of how the uses would lay out and how they would be connected. With Keizer Station, generally, there was a huge infrastructure need for roads. And so at one point in time, it was the largest LID, local improvement district, in the state of Oregon, as far as the amount of money that was there. And it's pretty complicated, and I don't do math. I'm a planner, not an engineer. Very big difference. We do words. We don't do, no, some planners probably do good math. My son's good at math, but I don't like it. So, but all that to say, I think generally, yes, the Keizer Station is developing as planned. The master plan has been amended a few times. Specifically, the tribes land was amended a few times, and kind of to respond to what the market supports. But from a transportation specific point of view, there was a overall traffic impact analysis done with the Keizer Station, and it identified a lot of different mitigation measures, not only building the roads within it, but also some things that are like some bigger ticket items, like there needs to be improvements to the I-5 interchange. Now, there's a portion of that the city, which is the developer and the city, are responsible for, but a large portion of it is dependent on ODOT. So, like, one of the things, just as an example, one of the mitigation measures calls for a second southbound turn lane to get folks out and onto I-5. Now, there's some challenges construction-wise to make that happen, and design work that hasn't been done. But from a concepts point of view, those are things that would honestly improve the traffic right now if they were built. The other thing that was done is, the operations of River Road and Lock Haven there by 7-Eleven were actually changed a little bit, and the turn lane reconfigured. The additional right turn lane by Whitaker that goes on to 14th, that was one of the identified things. And then also some improvements there at Lock Haven and McLeod itself and how that intersection operates. So that'd be kind of an example of when a land use case came in, there was an overall traffic study saying, hey, here's the kind of traffic that's going to be produced, and here's what it's going to do to the overall system, not just within itself, but also a more system broad, which I think one of the later questions kind of speaks to that, on how we handle that. But realistically, is traffic getting worse? I mean, I live here, so I would say there's definitely activity. The question becomes, at what level is an unacceptable level of service that the intersections operate at, and things like that. So I think it's hard. And one of the other things that is unique is with the overall master plan and the way that transportation or traffic engineers look at trip counts and trip generation, we ended up with an In-N-Out at Keizer Station. And that spot was planned for a restaurant always. But not every restaurant is In-N-Out, and I think anyone who lives here would attest to that. So that's an example where there's a much higher traffic volume practically than what the books would show necessarily. What I would say is that these kinds of concerns that are kind of alluded to in this question are the reasons that cities do transportation system plans, which we have a transportation system plan. It looks at kind of the whole city and the whole system, and it basically says, hey, these are the kind of things that you need to do to keep the level of service correct for folks and congestion levels and all of those things. And then it has a list of projects that should be done, and it's a long-range planning document, like a 20-year look. Ours, when we adopted this one, was 2009. So we've been wanting to do an update to our TSP for several years, applied for a couple grants that we didn't get. But the good news, and what I've kind of told council and planning commission, we are actually at the beginning stages of getting to get that TSP updated because of some funding that's become available at the state level. So I've actually been having meetings with ODOT and the state to kind of get our project underway. And my expectation, my hope, fingers crossed, we should be embarking on a process to update that TSP sometime in 2025, hopefully early in 2025. And I would expect us to be coming to this committee specifically for information and input, and we may even be talking about advisory. Normally with a TSP update, it's normally like an 18-month to 2-year process, and it's a large planning effort that involves a lot of community involvement and a lot of citizen involvement and neighborhood association involvement and traffic. If you have a traffic safety committee, or traffic safety bike ped committee, that's right, different name, sorry. So, you know, like on that one, I would say stay tuned. I don't have super great details yet. We haven't gone out for the RFPs for proposals. This is something we do depend heavily on traffic engineering firms and consultants. But we are working with the state to get our TSP updated, and the hope is that we might have our TSP updated. I mean, it's trying to have it done by the end of 2026. That's the goal. So we'll see if we hit that goal, but I think, you know, ultimately, if you would have asked me 2 years ago, I would have said, I don't know. And now I'm saying, I'm pretty sure. So that's kind of good news. Jumping into kind of Committee Member de Blasi's question.
Shane, could I ask
absolutely.
Two questions there? One is, I believe that the bike lanes in the Keizer station, at least in portions of them, are substandard. They're not wide enough. I'm curious why, in terms of those roadways are new. I mean, they should have been designed with adequate bike lanes, and
Like they're too narrow?
they're too narrow. And in the entrance coming in by the Chick-fil-A and that curve and different things in there. One of the reasons for having the recommended width on bike lanes is that gravel and different debris from the road, because of the air things from cars, all gets deposited over there. So the full lane is generally not available to a cyclist. And
Gotcha.
so in general, I believe it's a 35-mile speed limit, and the cyclists are often in the car lane because of the, and the second thing you mentioned, and so I'm curious just in terms of the planning for such a thing, why that exists that way. And then the second one is you mentioned the intersection at Lock Haven and McLeod. As designed, intersections like that I've seen more recently tend to be more, there's a right turn lane and a graduated bike lane, so that the conflict between the car and the bikes, and there it's pretty crucial, because the cars are traveling, if they don't get a red light, can be traveling fairly fast, making a right-hand turn, and they cross the bike lane and right at the turn, as opposed to, say, the right turn going into Keizer Station or something, where there is a right turn lane and a graduated zone in which the bike lane, the bikes and the cars can negotiate.
Yeah. Okay, so let me kind of bite it in a couple pieces. The short answer is I don't know. No, honestly, I don't know for sure. So basically, what our transportation system plan and development code, they kind of line out what type of streets and what the street standard is. So for right-of-way widths, travel lane widths, those kinds of things. When streets are constructed, I'm not an engineer. That's something more that the engineering folks would review here at the city. So if something didn't get built to our adopted standard, I mean, the short answer is that would be an error. That shouldn't have been done. My thought is that, there's a couple things that you hit on, and what it may be is that if it was built to the appropriate adopted standard, the situation you're describing where, hey, bike lanes are recommended to be a certain width because of debris and things like that, it may be that that's something that our standards need to be looked at and they need to be changed a little bit to reflect that in the built environment. One of the things that we've identified with some of the other planning efforts we've done in recent years, like we did a big planning project called the Keizer Revitalization Plan, with looking at River Road specifically in our Cherry area. And clearly you're a cyclist and you're well aware River Road there aren't bike lanes in a big, huge stretch of it, right? There's like south part of River Road, like south of Shimawa, I guess? Is that where?
It's the Great Barrier Reef.
Right? I mean, there's just nothing. And so that's something that we identified in that planning document that needs to be resolved, and also a more of a focus on those bike and ped facilities that would also interconnect through the neighborhoods. And so there was some identified concepts. Ultimately, though, when that went to be adopted as the plan was adopted, but it's not, when I say plan, I don't mean like a blueprint. These are planning documents, so they're more at a higher, maybe like more of a 10,000 foot than a 100-foot look. But ultimately, I actually think it was probably the correct decision to be made for the policymakers at that level, which was, really this issue needs to be addressed when we update our TSP. So with the TSP that we're going into, that along with some other stuff that's coming from the state level that is surrounded by what are called climate-friendly and equitable communities rules, which essentially they're geared towards greenhouse gas reductions with a focus on more multimodal transportation options. And when I say multimodal, I mean bike, ped, rolling, walking, non-car kind of access, basically. And so, I think that this TSP update that we're going to be going through, by and large, our car transportation system, it's built in the city. There's not a lot of new streets that are planned or identified. There's a small little area of cut through that would connect basically near Verda, that would connect through to the north across, if you know the Earl property, on trail there, and then through the Isla Bay piece, and would daylight out on River Road. That was identified way back in the 2009 plan, which I guess with an update that concept could go away theoretically, but it was serving a bunch of purposes. A big part of it is we have a lot of folks that live up north, including me, who, when I don't have a commute to speak of, but other folks that come from the freeway, they kind of jam up Lock Haven coming in. And so that was kind of to divert some traffic to the north and help the whole system function a little bit better. But the other thing that you kind of got to that I wanted to address, I don't know that back when we did our 2009 TSP and when street standards got adopted, there was a whole lot of thought to what they call BLTS, bike level traffic stress. And so there's some ratings now being used in the cycling community, which is not just, is there a bike lane, but what is the level of that bike lane that's provided that provides a level of comfort for the cyclist. So real serious cyclists, I see them all the time out on our country roads, and I think Hirsch, I've seen you, and I think sometimes you're crazy because you're taking your life into your own hands on these roads that have nothing. They're just driving. You guys are rolling on the streets. But like for somebody like me who's much less, I'm not an advanced cyclist. I will.
you're distinguished.
I love riding bikes when there's nice bike trails. However, so I do think that's something that as we've started looking at bicycle traffic specifically, that bicycle level of stress or the bicycle level traffic stress. I think that's what it stands for. Sorry, don't sue me for not knowing that acronym, but. I think that is something that is being folded into a lot of the work that we're now doing that historically maybe didn't get done. Now, Keizer Station, I can do some checking and chat with our public works folks and the engineering folks to find out if something truly was not built to our standard. I would be surprised that it wasn't built to the standard we told them, because that's new. Now, if you told me another part of town and it was old, I'd be like, well, you know, I don't know. I can't answer for the past. But, you know, I mean, the other thing with Keizer Station that we did, you know, there's also provided in there a network, and there was a lot of looking at not just the regional pathway along the parkway and the connectivity of that, but, you know, we had that continued all the way through Keizer Station north to Target. And there are larger areas that are designed for multi-use, like going under the Eulalie Bridge, that on the Jug Handle Road. I know on that one side, they designed that for multi-use because there was some issues with the bridge width and getting in there. So that might be part of what you're seeing in that area. I just need to check. I don't know off the top of my head. I'm sorry, I can't answer that clearly. But does that help a little bit for clarity? Yeah.
Just curious, we don't have a lot of areas in the current city limits for the development. I mean, we've got that big section up on River Road towards McNary Estates and that little chunk next to the middle school. But even those, how do we know that the most dangerous thing for bicycles and pedestrians, and probably cars too, are driveways and intersections?
Yeah.
And I was curious, if we take a look at River Road and those lots, I guess I'm prejudiced, how do we stop people from putting driveways and short roads on private property? I mean, is there?
Yeah.
It seems like in the old days, if you owned the property, you could put a driveway onto the road.
Yeah, there is some statutory issues where you can't just like carte blanche take somebody's access away or an access right away. But at River Road specifically, over the years, we've had standards in our code. You'd call them access control standards is generally what they're called. And, you know, there's some jurisdictions that have really stringent access control standards. Historically, Keizer did not. Keizer did develop a lot before we were even a city, frankly. So that's part of it. And also, like, in a lot of areas where our commercial activity is and higher traffic volumes, where some of those problems you're talking about exist, it's very parcelized. So there's a lot of small parcels, rather than large chunks. But when we did our revitalization plan and even previous planning efforts, we had identified that access control issue is an issue. And it is it's a barrier to seeing redevelopment. It's a barrier to the conflict between bikes and cars, and frankly, cars and pedestrians and cars and all of that. So we actually did adopt a standard now where with certain redevelopment projects, if a property has access to a side street, they're required to take that access off the side street. And if they go and redevelop an existing parcel that maybe already has an access, but they have another access, we'll make them close the access. There are some thresholds in the code that are aligned with that. I mean, an example, if you've all been around, well, I know at least, I don't know, Brenda, if I know you or not. I don't know if I've met you formally, but I've been around here a long time, and you know, some years ago, it's the 511 store. Used to be the old Connects, and then was an appliance store for a while. Yep. So they did an addition and a remodel, and when they came in to talk to us about it, we said, well, their original plan was a little bit grander than what they ended up doing. And we're like, well, you're going to have to get rid of that driveway on River Road and everything's going to have to come off on the side street. And they were like, we don't want to do that. And so they actually modified their project to get them under that threshold because they didn't want to lose their River Road driveway. Because for the business owners, that's part of the issue is they want the visibility on River Road, and it's just easier for people to get in and out. I mean, it's a dynamic that's there. But we do have in our code some standards that say, hey, when you hit this level of % of addition or cost based on assessed values, then we have the right to take your driveway away. Or if you're like the old porterhouse on the corner of, was that Churchdale? That one is scraped and that's going to be a new little mixed use building. For years they had the driveway straight out onto River Road and he'd back his Suburban out into the road and it was totally dangerous. But like with the redevelopment of that, there will be no access to River Road. So we do have some access control standards in place, but they are very specific to River Road and that corridor only. It doesn't go beyond that. Now, could it go beyond that? Possibly. Rules can be changed, but we don't have those in place right now. Does that help?
Kinda.
Okay.
I don't see a solution to it.
It's a very big challenge. Honestly, the solution is having a person buy up a bunch of property and then redevelop it, because then I can regulate it and say, because ideally, it's hard when you inherit a lineally strip that's developed, that was River Road was an old country road back in the day. And when you have that development pattern that's there and you have property values, what they are, and that starts to turn into commercial development, if it was green, when I say greenfield development, I mean big pieces of vacant land. With the greenfield development, that design would look totally different. As a planner, I would say, hey, and actually business owners would do it too, you'd probably pull all the buildings up on the street and you would put a frontage road behind. So you'd have a couple of different access points that would be shared, and then that would feed into the parking lots behind the buildings, which is something that we'd like to see happen, but there isn't a magic pot of money. And the city, honestly, we don't have a economic development program like that in place. Really big cities, sometimes they do that. They'll go out and they'll actually aggregate and buy up properties and then create urban renewal districts and put them on the open market to developers and enter into agreements and do all that. You're looking at the planning department, myself, and I have one other staff person as an assistant planner. So, there would be significantly a different approach that we'd have to take to get to that level. Okay. So, Mr. Blassi, welcome. You're just on time for your questions to be answered.
Yeah, I timed that perfectly, didn't I?
So we're just kind of jumping in, and I'd share with the committee members, I just want to be a conversation. Feel free to ask me questions as we go. I'm going to try to hit on your questions the best of my ability. Thank you for not throwing me any easy softballs. So we'll kind of jump in. One of the questions the committee member DeBlassi had was, or Chair DeBlassi, right? Was for multifamily housing and when would be the required to have their units face the street. We do have a requirement along River Road in what we call our centers, which are basically, there's a Lock Haven Center, a Shamawa Center, and a Cherry Center. When we did our revitalization plan, basically we imagined that those kind of 3 nodes would have a higher intensity of uses and redevelopment in the next 20 years, as it happens. So we do have a requirement that there is building access to the street, and we also require buildings to be actually closer to the street in those areas. So an example of that would be the brand new apartments going in on River Road north of Lock Haven. Those are pulled in, they're 10 feet off the property line. Now that's a hard one because the right-of-way is a little bit wider in there, but those are pulled up closer to the street and then they have shared accesses. The buildings, the way that they're shaped, they actually go in and then they go up a stairway to go in the units. So they have basically an entry of each building. It's not each individual unit, but it is the buildings themselves. So it meets our standard. So that would be different than sometimes we've seen apartment complexes built, which I think is what Mr. Blassi is referring to, where it's just like you're seeing the backside of the building or whatever. So we did make a change to our code to require that in our centers. We don't require that everywhere currently. I suppose to have that happen, it would require some amendments to the code and some regulation changes, which would be possible. One of the things that's been of concern at the Planning Commission level is flexibility for property owners and developers to make sites work. As I was kind of saying earlier, we have a lot of property that's very aggregated into small pieces, and so they are pretty challenging sometimes for folks to utilize that at a higher threshold. And so generally, the position that's kind of been taken by the commission and by the council, at least for the last few years, has been one of we want to provide opportunity and options for folks more than more regulations that are harder for them to actually realize their development goals. So hopefully that gets to that question a little bit. Sorry, I can't see you guys with my reading glasses, but I can't see my paper without them, so I keep going back and forth. Yeah, go ahead.
Well, I was just going to say, I mean, I hear what you're saying and that we have it on those nodes in the redevelopment areas. You know, I've heard from many folks who are upset about the apartments, and I know you have too, right? And that's
Yes,
just the
I have.
nature of things, right?
Yeah, and for the record, Shane doesn't build apartments. So, okay.
Right. You're just the person that they know who to yell
Yeah.
at, right? So, and I totally get that. The two things that I'm driving at with my question are, one, how do we make it feel like it blends in with the existing neighborhood? And, you know, most house fronts don't face the backyard, right? And secondly, it also creates a better, more comfortable, more enticing walking environment, right? So,
Yeah. No, I hear your point. I mean, yes. And like I said, I think, you know, like I said, we do have some requirements in our centers where we view those as being more urban scapes. I mean, you know, it's hard. River Road is not a super pedestrian street. It's not a neighborhood.
Right.
In a residential area, which generally apartments aren't allowed in residential areas. They're right, and they're the higher density areas or the commercial or the mixed use areas. So part of that is a function of the zoning of the land that it sits under. So that, I mean, it is definitely a challenge. But there is, like I said, with a lot of apartment complexes, there's also a factor to the geometry of each piece of land. But I do think, you know, in order to get to what you're speaking to, you know, what would need to happen is there would have to be some amendments to some of our design standards to make that happen. Right. So, I mean, ultimately, that would be something that would be initiated by council or by planning commission. And if that was something that they wanted to push forward with, you know, there's a lot of different tools out there, as you allude to. I mean, there definitely is. I think it's hard because with larger tracts of land that are getting developed, a lot of times it's easier to make that work than what we've seen in the last several years, which have been a little bit smaller pieces for the most part that are almost kind of infilling or whatever. And so there's some limited opportunity for building siting. But no, that's, anyway, yeah.
I'm curious how you define a residential street. Lock Haven is all residents, and
Yeah.
a school and a church.
Sure.
Verda is all residents.
Yeah.
Wheatland are all
Yes, maybe I
residents
should
and
use a
church.
different term. So you've got street designations in our TSP, which actually I think there was a question about street designations. So generally there's local streets, and local streets have a couple different categories based on the volume of units and traffic they serve. And then there's collector and arterial streets. So all the streets you alluded to are designated as collector and arterial streets in our plan because they do carry a lot more traffic through the city to other areas. But yeah, and specifically with zoning, I was speaking to things that are zoned mixed use. So we still have some houses on River Road, but those haven't been zoned residential land ever. Well, I've been here 27 years. They've never been zoned residential since I've worked here. So I think it's hard because you're right. There's absolute truth to that. There's the built environment versus the comprehensive planned environment and the zoning planned environment. And so I guess that's what I was speaking to on the street classifications.
Yeah, I'm just troubled by the fact that based on how a mobility path is classified changes how you value the quality of life of the people living along the section. So for example, you said that we care about a structure fitting in on a residential street.
No, that's not what I said. Don't put words in my mouth, please.
But we don't so much on these other streets.
Not at all what I said, Mr. Philbrook. I don't appreciate you assuming there's a value assessment. That's a little bit offensive to me. Mr. de Blasi had a very different question that he asked me. So with that, we'll kind of reset. I don't know how I can clarify what I said, but there are zoning regulations and there are design standards. So we hold the properties that develop under those to those design standards. Now, in a residential neighborhood with houses, as Mr. de Blasi talked about, those are in areas zoned residential that have a certain design standard, where we have a front yard, we have a rear yard, we have a side yard. In those areas, those houses are to face the front of the street. In commercial zones, it is different because they're commercial zones. So it gives more flexibility to the site development. But yeah, so I don't know if that helps, but I don't appreciate.
So are you saying that along Verda and Wheatland, and Lock Haven, it's all zoned commercial?
No, not every property is zoned that. And just to clarify, guys, I'm not here to argue with you. I'm here to answer your questions. So please ask questions. I don't appreciate it.
Are those streets mentioned, the three main, Verda, Wheatland, Lock Haven, are they zoned multi-use?
It depends on where you're at. You need to look at the zoning map.
Individual lots that
Yeah.
are done?
Yeah, we have a zoning map. Every piece of property has a zone.
Okay.
Windsor Island is another one, and
Yep.
it's zoned, we even have agricultural.
Yeah, there's ag industrial. There's a lot of different zoning designations. It's an overall system, but the map covers the whole city. So
Shane, am I correct that I live out on Wheatland Road. My thought was, it's just totally random what they did on most of the streets, even leaving Keizer. Now, I know they developed chunks of that, but it's kind of, if somebody had wanted to put in a 7-Eleven or something on Park Meadow instead of the apartment building.
you mean way
When it
back?
was developing 20, 30 years ago.
No, those properties were zoned residential when they were brought and annexed into the city. They would have been probably urban transition at first, and then they got redeveloped according to the comprehensive plan. So the comprehensive plan has been in effect since 1987. So the city was incorporated in 83. We adopted our first comprehensive plan in 1987 as a post-acknowledgement to the Salem area comprehensive
Yeah.
plan, because we share an urban growth boundary. So, there is things, we have some pieces on Shamawa. I can think of the convenience store down by McNary High School that I used to go to as a kid when I lived down that way. That is not in a commercial zone, but that predates, I think that predates me being alive. So there are pieces like that, that would be considered kind of pre-existing non-conforming uses now. There's also a whole bunch of houses in Southeast Keizer in an area that's zoned some industrial general and industrial business park, that some of that's redeveloped, like on Candlewood in those areas. So yeah.
I thought it was interesting. I spent some time in Germany. When you go to the residential areas, you'll be walking along and there'll be a pub in somebody's garage.
Yeah.
They're not big businesses. Or you'll find a restaurant in somebody's living room. And they're obviously, you're in residential areas. Or they decided they converted their house to a B&B with food.
Yeah.
And so, but there's no scheme to it. Otherwise, if the person decided, who lived over on Park Meadow, to open the pub in his garage.
Yeah,
Over
Oregon.
there, they would allow it. I take it we wouldn't allow that here.
Oregon's a little different.
Yeah.
Like we're definitely have higher you can go to different states in the country where you'll see stuff like that. They don't have the same kind of zoning regulations that we have in Oregon. We're pretty. Oregon is kind of a poster child for a lot of land use planning stuff around the nation. But yeah, it's interesting you said that. I was just in Portugal a couple weeks ago, and yeah, very different, and also very different being in a city that's built hundreds of years before automobiles existed.
Yeah.
And
Oh, yeah.
completely different dynamic, completely different living style. You know, there's no large track lots with 10,000 square foot lots and yards. Everything's connected. Very different. But yeah. So anyway,
Brenda had a question.
yeah.
So I didn't send in a question, but
no
if
problem.
this is not the right question for you, just defer to somebody else. So when I ride my bike in Salem, they have this designated greenway. It's really cool, and a little bit I've looked into it, because I tried to contact who did that, and it hasn't quite figured that out. But it looked like it took them almost 20 years to make that completely happen. So it seems like that might be long-range planning. Is that something that your group would be working towards?
So not necessarily directly. I think those would be things, my guess is it the Maple one? Okay. So I think that was identified in their TSPs. So like there are some kind of general concepts, like in Keizer, we have a general concept of the possibility in our parks master planning stuff to have like a lineal connection along Claga Creek. So it's working toward that. There's not any design for it or anything like that, but there's definitely a long-range look for that. The transportation system plan itself, it identifies in it, even in 2009, that we have a lack of connecting bicycle facilities and pedestrian facilities, and we'd like to see more of those as opportunity provides. We just went through a process for a concept plan for Wheatland Road, a year, 2 years ago maybe, where we're looking at Wheatland Road, and can't call it a plan. You can't call it a design because it's really a concept at this stage, but looking at a multimodal plan for Wheatland, basically all the way from River up to the north part of town. And so there was a process that we went through. There was some grant funding. That was a partnership of, I was part of it, but also Public Works. And a lot of the stuff we do, which I think that's kind of the next question, was transportation planning, who's responsible, all of that. It is, in Keizer, it is a partnership between our department and Public Works. So the TSP update that we're about to embark on, I'm probably going to be named as the main staff point contact, but the Public Works Director will also be on every call and meeting with me, and then there'll be advisory committees and there'll be stakeholder groups and all of that kind of stuff. But yeah, because I don't construct things and I don't look at construction plans. I mean, that is in the Public Works wheelhouse and the city engineer's wheelhouse. But as far as, the development code lives where, hey, if we have a new subdivision come in and there's opportunity to connect, we'll require a street to connect. Now, that did not always happen in Keizer. Like there's lots of neighborhoods where it's cul-de-sacville, right? Now that's something that in my time being here, there was a shift away and back to more connected neighborhoods that we want to see. Now the challenge is that there are kind of threshold elements of when can we require something to connect, or versus, well, it's all built out and there's nothing to connect to. And so that's one of the things we have to look at as application as they come in. But, like when a couple of the subdivisions went in down by Keizer Rapids Park, one of those that went in, we required them to connect the pedestrian path through so the neighborhood could come straight through without having to walk all the way out and around. And our code actually has some things spelled out to things like area tractors, and if it's more than a quarter a mile away. If it's less than a quarter mile away, we can't make them do it. But if it's more than a quarter mile away, we can make them do it. Now, in some cases, we will try to just talk them into doing it because it makes sense for their development and it's good. But I think it's hard because some of those opinions, they shift with time. And, that's just a reality of life. But, like I said, we do regulate some of those things, and transportation planning as a whole, it's hard. You've got cities that have whole transportation planning units.
Right.
We don't have that here.
Right.
So.
Yeah, and what I was envisioning was the kind of like what Washington County has, where it's a land use and transportation department, where you're marrying the two because one, it's a circle, one affects the other, which affects back to the original. And while I get totally that, Public Works understands the nuts and bolts of construction and contract management on that side, at least from the way I've seen it, is council will ask Public Works Director, hey, can we put this in? Rather than how I'm envisioning it, where your abundantly staffed department would look at, the TSP and whatever other known needs there are for transportation, and try and incorporate that, like, before somebody's even thought to develop a piece of ground. Like, I guess essentially it's like you're platting something.
I mean, that's kind of what the TSP does now. I mean, the reality is there's very little new streets that are proposed to serve Keizer. The existing system is adequate. Now, when we get into talking about level of congestion and traffic volumes and specifically bike and ped facilities that are lacking, that's different because the street system already exists. And ultimately, I wish that back when big portions of Keizer were developed, it wasn't just out in Marion County where they were developing turnpike section streets with no urban environment improvements, because we would be better off, because now we've inherited a whole bunch of streets that don't have much redevelopment potential. So the only way to do it is the magical pot of money that we don't have. But ultimately, there's a lot of areas in town where we have adequate right-of-way to add sidewalks, but we don't have adequate money to add sidewalks. So then we're dependent, like Verta has been planned to be improved. The south part of Verta has been planned to be improved for years. It's finally happening, right? I mean, it's finally starting to happen, but that took multiple years of process to go through and get funding to make that actually a reality. So that's part of it where, and that's the other piece to speak to the transportation planning, is there's a couple different ways to look at it. There's administration and then planning. And I view transportation planning more as kind of what you're saying, where it is more planning for this area of land that's not yet developed and how is that going to connect. And honestly, we don't have much of that. The one area we have, the LFA piece, there is a plan in the TSP that shows, hey, future connection of this so that the system is connected through and bicycle facilities are provided. So we're kind of in a little different ballgame, because I wouldn't necessarily say that it was as much transportation planning that some of our issues in Keizer are. It has more to do with lack of existing facilities on existing systems that are already there. Does that?
Yeah. Which makes me think of the flip side of the coin then, is not the system planning and the big scale or greenfield development, but I know, we have contracts to do work like with the ADA things and repaving and all that. Who would be the person or the department that would make it just a rule that anytime you're breaking up pavement or sidewalk, that you incorporate some type of transportation safety, bike ped enhancement to that, rather than just tearing it apart and putting it back together, or, essentially that?
That's a good question. I guess I would need to. So in your scenario, you're saying sidewalk gets raised by a tree limb, so they go to replace the sidewalk panel, or what's the? Help me understand. I'm sorry, I might be dense. I may not just be understanding.
So I mentioned the ADA thing.
Yeah.
Right? So we had to do all those ADA ramps,
Yes.
right? And that meant there was tearing apart sidewalk as well as pavement, right?
In some spots, yeah.
Right, to install them. So at some of those spots, maybe not all of them, but some of them, there could have been, say, a bulb out or something that would have been a safety enhancement.
Yeah, I think, so, that project mostly River Road, right?
I think so.
For the ADA upgrades, ramps, yeah. It was driven by state, the state that we had to do upgrades. One of the challenges with transportation planning, so this kind of like this little bit of a rabbit trail, but we definitely do look at those things on a case-by-case basis. One of the bigger challenges that cities have is, do you actually have right-of-way or not? because you can't just take people's property, right? You have to compensate them. So that's the Verta project right now. They've been going through, and ODOT's, I think it's ODOT who's heading that up, who's been going through doing a ton of survey work, and they're starting to talk to property owners because they've identified that there needs to be acquisitions. And same with our Wheatland project. There will be, when that, which I think Hershey were on that committee. But so like that, we identified even in the concept level phase, in order to achieve this concept of multimodal transportation facility that's going to be much better. The level of stress is going to be great. I mean, I used to walk that loop a lot, and it was pretty sketchy, especially at night. I mean, I agree 100%. But one of the big challenges is that when you don't have the land, you don't have the ability to add those things. So, but I mean, I think that's, I don't know if that helps answer it, but.
Well, so I guess the land I'm thinking of taking, for lack of a better word, wouldn't be some privately held land, but it's within the right of way. So like a bulb out would be going out into pavement.
Yeah, I mean, and if it was already in the right of way, I mean, that would be a possibility. I mean, the ADA ramp upgrade was funded through some grant money, but yes, it's possible the city could do that. Generally, like things like bulb outs are not part of our adopted design standards. And again, that's where, you know, the TSP is kind of like a mother document that guides it, and then out of those, you get right-of-way width designations, and then there are actual street design standards that live in public works specifications. And so those, maybe though, to answer that, I guess maybe the answer would be those public works specifications would need to be modified. And ultimately identified. I mean, I think that's one of the pieces. I know there's been a ton of talk for years about lack of sidewalks. And honestly, like what really needs to happen from a planning perspective is they need to be prioritized. Like, well, what are the highest priorities? And one of the pieces with our new TSP update that we're going to be going through, there are new rules associated with transportation planning coming out of the Climate Friendly Equitable Communities rules, where as we are historically, you'd say, hey, the TSP, here's all the big wish list. Okay, that's what we want to do. Okay, how do you fund it? So now TSPs are going to be being looked at a little bit differently as far as what is your funding level and what are you going to be obligating and things like that. So I'm going to be interested to go through the process and see where we land as a city. But we kind of know there is generally a community desire to move toward having some of those additional sidewalks, additional bike facilities. So I think that is going to be reflected in this next round of TSP update in some way, shape, or form. Yeah.
Shane, I'm not just kind of going overboard here for a second. A lot of the work of the transportation plan will be moving people in cars from point A to point B, usually out of Keizer and back into Keizer. Or maybe go to Keizer Station and drive around Keizer Station. But it's pretty much auto-based. And I know Chariots and some people are pushing mass transportation, buses, walking. If we let the current system stay as it is and not improve it, then with the increase in population and increase in number of cars per house, the system will bog down to where it'll take you an hour to get into downtown Salem. Rather than that as a problem, it really is a solution to mass transit. Let it happen, and people will start taking the bus. And then you have bus lanes. Now, the reason for that, I lived in New York for a while, and when you live out, like way out in Brooklyn, East Brooklyn, half the people have cars.
Sure.
Why? Because there's nowhere you can drive it. It's not that they don't want to.
Yeah, or there's nowhere to park once you get there.
You'll walk, those people walk more than people in Keizer think of walking.
Yeah.
Otherwise, there was nothing to walk 6-8 blocks to the subway, 2 blocks to the bus, 4 blocks, whatever. You walk all the time, and you take mass transit because you can't afford a car. You can't afford to park it. You can't afford to drive it. There's nowhere to drive to. Drive downtown Manhattan.
Yep.
So I'm wondering if we let the auto transportation just quit, don't try and make it any better at all, that the bus bicycling and walking system will develop out of no other choice. And that sounds kind of facetious, but I'm pretty kind of hoping that would happen. I see that because I lived in Portland for a long time too. Yeah, we put in 205 so you could get from one end of Portland to the other or get around Portland quicker. That's a lot of money to move a lot of cars, and they're always widening it. And same thing with I-5. Well, let it fail and people will take the light rail. And go to the parking places and take it. So anyway, just a thought.
I don't know if you want to respond to that, or
No,
just.
it wasn't a response, it was more of a comment.
It's just okay.
You didn't have to agree or disagree.
Hirsch, you had something?
As an ex-transit commissioner, transit has greatly improved in the last 10 years in our area. They've got more solid funding. But, and I'm very much a proponent of the transit, and it will be part of the TSP.
Yeah.
It's built in. So we want to make sure that their routes serve our current areas and our projected areas. But the reality is, I like David's idea in a way, but the reality is we have to have decent streets just for the buses and decent access. And the other reality that I kind of learned the hard way is not everybody will use the bus. Because it doesn't go just everywhere, because it's not a taxi service where it's direct to one place to another. They provide a lot of services, with Cherry Lift and all that.
Sure.
But we want to make sure that they're included in any transportation plan with improvements, especially since they now can say, yes, we can do some things. But let's keep the reality that we're still going to have cars, whether they're gasoline or other powered. We're still going to have those in the future. We're still wanting improvement with bicycle facilities. And I have to say, over the last 20 years in Keizer, there's been tremendous improvement, but it's all been so incremental that people don't really jump out and see it. But it's good that just having the Bikeways committee was something that was only started in 1997. So that was just my comments, and working with you and Public Works, we can get some things done within our budget constraints.
Yeah, and rest assured, transit is a huge element to transportation system planning and to transportation planning in general. As I kind of alluded to earlier, we're doing all these different rules that have come down from the state, and Mr. Dempster had mentioned that, TSPs, I would agree with his assessment from the historical perspective that historically TSPs have been looked at level of service specific to vehicles, congestion factors, level of service of intersections. The new rules that have come out of the climate-friendly equitable communities rules have shifted that metric a bit. And I'm not an engineer. I don't know exactly how it's going to work out, but there's new rules that nobody quite knows what they mean. But there is an actual shift away from just looking at congestion and level of service. We are now going to be looking at multimodal and all of those pieces is in an effort to provide a more robust transportation system, not a car system, but a transportation system. Now, the issue becomes this, and this is again why I always go back to the transportation system plan. It's a long-range document. So a lot of the questions and the concerns I get from folks are, well, didn't you think about this? Didn't you think about this? Didn't you think about this? I've got those tonight already. The reality is yes, we do think about those things. Yes, we do try to plan for the future. That is the point of land use planning in Oregon and comprehensive planning and transportation planning. That doesn't mean that immediately it translates into the next project you see that goes up, though. And so that's kind of that challenge and that piece that we're moving in that direction. Right now, our TSP, as I said, it's a 2009 document. The focus was definitely level of service, vehicle congestion. That was the priority. For example, every local street in town is also considered a bike lane, if you didn't know that. So it's just a shared facility. And I don't know that that standard will really change. That's a pretty common standard that folks have, but there are, and I won't say they're new and innovative because they've been around forever, but things like sharrows and different things where it does a better job of defining the shared transportation systems so that it increases the usability for the cyclists and the folks that are, I'm on a mobility device that's not necessarily on the sidewalk. I'm in the street, but, Rivercrest is a good example of a street where it still carries a pretty decent volume of traffic, even though it's a local street. But it's also identified, I think, in the scenic Bikeways route or whatever. And there's no bike facilities along that thing. But the revitalization spoke to that, the plan spoke to that and said, this would be a good opportunity to add some of those things like sharrows or share the road signs or some sort of actual designations that would kind of clarify that. And so again, that's great to have it as a concept, but then getting it implemented is that next step where we have not had a robust implementation program except by, brand new street gets put in, you're going to build these things. So that's kind of the difference on kind of how it works, just the nuts and bolts of it. So.
If I could just comment on what David was saying, I understand where he's coming from too. I guess the worst form of government though is to take something away from someone and not provide them with a good option and an alternative. So as Hirsch was talking about, keep building that robust bus, bike, and ped network, but at the same time, not trying to induce more traffic by adding another lane to a road or something.
No, I think there's a lot of different approaches. As I said, I think, very soon, the city, already we can't require parking in a huge portion of the city based on the fact that it's served by transit. And ultimately with the new rules, we won't be able to require any parking citywide pretty darn soon. So, that's one of those things that the state's perspective from a law or whatever administrative rulemaking perspective is the market will drive what's necessary. And so that's, again, you see different places that you go to and depending on when they were constructed. Manhattan was built prior to the automobile. It's amazing. I love going there and getting my, whatever they call it, the whatever card that you can ride the transit all week for like $30 or something. And it's incredible. You get everywhere you need to be. It takes a little bit to master the layout, but once you do, it's like awesome. Clearly, we were developed out west post-automobile for the most part. We weren't. We were here before. My family settled in the Corvallis area. But, it is a different dynamic of when density started to come into play. Street hierarchy designs, I think I hit on that a little bit. I don't have an answer for you for the speed. I don't do anything with speed. There's nothing in my code about speed. I do know there was some changes at the state level where that speed studies and speed zones could be changed and initiated at a city level. I don't exactly know the rules around that though, Michael.
But I thought, and maybe Hirsch can correct me if I'm wrong too, but there is a table in the code that talks about the type of street.
Yeah, we have type of street and like the dwelling units and whatnot in the development code.
I thought it also had like lane width and speed.
In my development code?
I swore I saw that.
I don't think there's anything about speed. So, unless there's a different table.
It's been a while since I've perused that thing, but.
No, so I've got lanes, whether or not parking's allowed on it, whether or not bike lanes are required, which they're required on collectors and arterials, what I said earlier, roadway width, sidewalks, right of way, and the dwelling units served.
Maybe I had roadway width in my head and I then added speed to it.
Yeah.
You mentioned a little bit in one of your answers to one of us about, the looking at streets as the traffic that they serve. And now you're also talking about how we're moving away from that, right? Which is trying to get away from an auto focus. And so my question was thinking about it as the context of what's going on along. So like River Road is a commercial, mixed use, et cetera, type of street. So focus on, those are the uses we have. and we want people to be able to move around that. And so if we're gonna call that an arterial, that doesn't mean we need 12-foot lanes because we want cars to be able to move at a higher rate of speed versus a residential and the collector. So
Yeah.
that's just what I'm trying to get at.
Yeah, no, I mean, and
Flipping
that's,
a coin.
honestly, the revitalization plan that we did in 2018, it was a transportation, what is it, TGM, Transportation Growth Management Grant. So, I mean, it was a huge amount of transportation planning along with the land use, because transportation and land use is integrally connected. And clearly, we identified the fact that this is a problem, the way that it is. There's also not a easy solution because it's built, because there's not enough right-of-way. So like, ultimately, my expectation is as we go through the TSP update process, that's gonna be a big piece that gets talked about, because we need to land on an actual design for River Road and what that thing, ultimately what we want it to look like. Now, getting it to actually look like that, that's the implementation piece, where that may just require getting grant funding. It may require, as a developer comes in, then you're able to do that. Right now, when a developer comes in, we have to hold them to the standard that's adopted. And the standard that's adopted is it's an arterial street with a separated sidewalk. So that's why on River Road, the apartments came in, they brought the sidewalk back. Like, I mean, that's just the reality. That's the standard we have. We don't have another standard. We've identified that we need another standard, and we need probably a different standard that will work better, whether or not it's a mix of multi-use path or if it's a dedicated bike lane along one side. But there is a very significant cost associated with that. So that is definitely something that I'm gonna be interested to see how that kind of rolls out with our TSP update process over the next couple of years and where that lands.
So, the part of the table I did have correct, the lane width,
Yeah.
if, and this kind of gets back to the other
Well,
question.
it's roadway width, not lane width.
I thought it was.
No, it's your roadway width is what we list. Yeah, because even that was one of the things we talked about on River Road, is to save a little space would be to shrink the lanes and make them a little narrower. Because there are some standards you can't go under in like ODOT
Well, you
rules
can't
and
do a
stuff.
9-foot
But
lane.
yes, right now the River Road lanes they're wider than they would have to be.
Yeah.
Which make them more comfortable for cars, but obviously, so yes, so that all, and I didn't bring I should have brought the revitalization plan. They actually had a couple different cross sections and showed, I can't remember if it was 10 or 11 foot lanes. I think maybe right now there's like 12 or 13 foot lanes. There was also discussion in that process of get rid of the center turn lane or protect it. And that was like not met with peace from outside agencies and a bunch of citizens. So, I mean, again, that's the other piece, is you've got, with all of these planning processes, they're all kind of like on the foundation of goal 1 of the Oregon Land Use Planning System, which is public involvement. And so these decisions don't get made in a vacuum, they get made in a community. And so that's why the TSP process is a huge element of it, is how you're engaging the stakeholders. So, but yeah, I don't have anything. There may be a public works standard that specifies, hey, this is the lane width for this type of street, and that may be a different table
maybe.
that lives in their world. I don't know for sure.
Yeah, I don't know, and like I said, it's been a long time since I've looked at that document. But, okay, I
Yeah.
guess we can move on.
Yeah.
Shane, I realize speed is not in your area.
It is not.
The question I've had is that I've lived in Keizer a long time, and I think, as far as I know, the speeds on some of these streets have not changed over that time period. I mean, the
I
allowable
remember
speed.
when we dropped River Road a little bit in that
Yeah,
section. That's the
yeah.
only one I remember happening in my time being here. So yeah, and you've been here
But
longer than me.
My point is as development happens, the road improvements is a big, expensive construction job. But I'm thinking of areas like Wheatland, that used to be a 9-hole golf course and very rural.
Yeah.
I'm thinking of Verda, which was cows and
Yep.
and again, very kind of rural. And both places, because of development in the area, both on the roads themselves and periphery to them, the traffic density has gone up significantly. the usages and stuff. So Wheatland, you see people walking dogs and jogging and different things. Instead of having to wait years until there's a infrastructure change, it seems like one of the first things and inexpensive things to do would be to drop the speed limit. I think it's crazy, 35 miles an hour between a stop sign at Dearborn and a circle at Chemawa, and it's school crossings, and it's anyway.
Yeah.
How can that happen? I mean, in terms of making those adjustments as development happens.
Yeah, no. I mean, as I kind of alluded to before, so I know this is out of my wheelhouse. So I don't have a real answer for you. I know probably enough to be dangerous in this, but I will try since we're having the conversation tonight.
I guess what I want is a starting place.
Yeah. So no, I mean, I
whose
think
wheelhouse should I be
I think the
approaching?
starting place is this, David. Historically, it used to be that ODOT was the keeper of speed, period. And so there was certain metrics they looked at, and even if a city petitioned them, we want to lower the speed limit, it had to get approved. My understanding is there's been some things that have changed just within the last couple of years, because I have a few friends who are actual traffic engineers who I've talked to about this. And so there is a process now that I believe a city can reduce a speed, I don't think a ton, but maybe like by 5 miles an hour or something, if I remember. And if anybody else knows, chime in.
You can drop it, maybe 5. It's
think-
quite a process, but ODOT
Yeah.
eventually has to approve it.
Yeah, so I don't know, and here's, I mean, whatever, I'm if nothing, I'm honest. And so I don't really know what the charge of your committee is or all your responsibilities. In my mind, it's called the Traffic Safety Bike Ped Committee. So if there's a traffic safety concern that hinges around speed, I would think it would be appropriate if your committee was like, hey, we would like this to be looked at, that maybe, do you guys make recommendations to council on those kinds of things? So, I mean, I would think that would be the starting point, but I could be speaking wrong. Don, help me if am I close? Okay. So, I mean, I think, and again, if you're speaking to, we want to bake into the code as a legislative rule that says if you build this, there will be a traffic study on speed done or something like that. That doesn't exist now. I don't know if it would be legal to do it. I mean, that's ultimately when we change the code. Sometimes I want to change the code and then my lawyer says, Shane, you can't do that. That's a taking. You can't, whatever, I mean, so I'm like, oh, shoot. But that's what the neighbors want. And then I'm told no. So, I mean, that's something that, again, if this committee wanted to see changes to the Keizer Development Code, then the appropriate path forward would be, hey, as a committee, make a recommendation to our planning commission to bring it up and consider it. And like that, those are things that can be looked at for sure. But it would have to go through some sort of a real process. We wouldn't be able to arbitrarily say, hey, you're building apartments, lower the speed by 5 miles an hour or something.
Right, and if I could just, I would say, we, as you probably are well aware, we've talked countless hours about speeding, right? And then we get a study done by KPD, and they say, well, here's the bell curve of speeds.
Sure.
And they're at sometimes a little above, sometimes a little below, so there's not a speeding problem. But I think where David and a lot of us do fall out on that is, it's not that the people are speeding over the posted speed limit.
It's that the posted is too high already.
Right, so.
Yeah, I understand.
So to say,
Sure.
I guess
No,
we would, if there was a way to do it where, and because we've heard that, okay, now we don't have, we have to contract out the study to prove to ODOT that we can do it, right?
Mhm.
So it's like, we don't have the money
Yeah.
ourselves, the city doesn't have the money, so it's like,
Yeah.
it becomes an endless talking loop, and that's.
Yeah, I mean, it's hard, like, we're not a small city, we're a medium-sized city, but, I mean, I think like any local government, I mean, ultimately, if there's enough of a concern, it becomes a higher priority. Like, I mean, that's just the reality of life. So I don't know how to advise you guys on that. But I understand what you're saying. It's not so much the speeding, it's that the posted speed is too high. And, you know, we talked about that at length on the Wheatland
Oh, yeah.
concept plan. The fact that, you know, it's like a 40-mile-an-hour speed limit, and I used to live up Wheatland, and I would ride my little scooter home, and it's like top speed is 40, and I'd have people ride on people aren't going 40. You know, I mean, they're not necessarily going 50, but it's, you know, pushing it. And so, you know, we talked about that one of the pieces to make bike level of stress better and usability for pedestrians maybe needs to be a consideration of actually really dropping that speed limit. So, I mean, I do think those are things that can be on the table. To get them on the table effectively, that's a whole nother question. But like I said, I mean, you are the Traffic Safety Committee, so I mean, I do think that, you know, if there's a recommendation from the Traffic Safety Committee for council to consider, I mean, ultimately, council's the one that directs staff to do those studies or to look into it. I mean, I think what becomes the issue is what's a perceived problem or a real problem, and under whose judgment is the problem there. And that's the part, it's that court of public opinion to figure out, okay, this needs to be a priority, and then it's a priority, and so it happens. And so, like, I think that's, I don't know, does that help?
Yeah, but the court of public opinion, I think, and this might even be kind of in line with what David was saying, it's like, everybody wants the speed slower, except when they're driving on the road, right? So.
There's truth to that, I suppose.
All right, well,
Okay.
then Bill Hirsch, you had something to say?
Oh, it was just on some history on speed. I was involved with the whole process for changing North River Road down to 40. That process was years in it making. The people that were in opposition were very well funded, and it took 5-6 years. And it wanted to drop to 35, but we got 40. So.
From 55.
Yeah. And the city council took a lot of heat. Were you around when that happened?
I remember when it happened. I had
There was
no
a lot of
involvement.
heat. And farm groups,
Mm-hmm.
citizens,
Yeah,
all over. So be aware that there are others out there that have different opinion on speed. That's for sure.
So in looking at the
That's it.
questions, I think we got to most of them. I think we got to Mr. Philbrick's for the most part, except I don't think I really hit on the first question Mr. Philbrick had, which was about when are traffic implications considered, like at what threshold. So I'll just speak to that briefly. I know it's getting late. I appreciate you guys letting me chat with you. So right now in our code, if somebody proposes a comprehensive plan and zone change, traffic impact analysis is going to be required with all those applications. So on Verda, where the apartments are, that was residentially zoned originally. It came in for a comp plan zone change to go to medium density, had to do a TIA, traffic impact analysis on it, that whole 9 yards as part of that application. I was like way back in 2014 when that application started. So that gets done. The other time it gets done is if development is going to generate more than 250 average daily trips. So like the apartments on River Road that are being built right now, actually just the very first certificate of occupancy came across my desk. They're just kind of wrapping that project up. They had to do a TIA before they could get building permits submitted to look at the traffic implications of that. So that's kind of a couple of the thresholds that we have in our code that spell that out. One of the things it doesn't trigger it is frankly the majority of the small residential development we've had in Keizer the last 20 years. When somebody takes a lot and they split a big lot into 2 small lots or 1 additional small lot, it's generating 10 more trips. And so there isn't any specific traffic study that gets done outside of the broader TSP elements of what's that feeding into. The other thing that comes into play a little bit with that, which is kind of in these questions, is when you've got a substandard street, can I just say, hey, you can't do anything more because the street is substandard. The short answer is no, I really can't do that. It's like a taking of property rights. And so it's a little hard. There are times where we can require off-site things. One of the things with Keizer Station, the walkway along Shamawa that didn't exist prior to Area C happening, that was a off-site negotiated mitigation to get a better connection for pedestrians along Shamawa, so like past Verda connecting out to, out all the way to Keizer Station. So it does become a little bit of a challenge there, but like I said, the code has some specific thresholds in place for certain types of things, but generally the TSP also takes into consideration land use and allowed land uses for future build out, and then tries to say, hey, these are the kinds of streets that you need here and locals and all of that kind of stuff.
We've had some testimony of people who were concerned about the traffic generated by Keizer Rapids Park, and particularly with the developments and activities and stuff there.
Yeah.
I realize that may be a complex issue, but
I don't know how to answer that one. I literally wrote in my little notes when I was reading through this, I was like, that's a good question. So I do know that the city has, I've also heard those things, and, like things like building turf fields and, what happens if it's super wildly successful and busy with things. What I would speak to that a little bit is, Shamawa is designated as a arterial street or a minor arterial street from River Road to Windsor. It might drop, I don't know what it is past Windsor, but I know like past 15th, it's not. So, I think, I know there's been some discussions as far as, an interest of saying maybe getting the transit route to consider changing its route to get some service out there. When Keizer Rapids was developed originally, we did add in the multi-use path. I'm not going to speak to whether or not it's wide enough. I used to take care of that park for some years, and I would have liked to see that multipath a little bit wider, to be perfectly honest, because I think it's only 8 or maybe 10 feet wide. But we did, when Keizer Rapids first opened, they did do that as an improvement. Now, as far as full urban improvements like the rest of Shamawa Road is, I think that would be one of those pieces that would be, it'd have to be a project, and the bill would have to be paid by the city. So like, it is a hard one, because, it's at what level and at what time do those things go in and when they're needed. But I mean, it is a really good question, David, and I don't have a great answer for you on it.
one of the specific questions from the person was whether a traffic study had been done, and
I don't know that, like recently.
I don't know, within the concept of the Keizer Rapids master plan or the amendments to it or whatever, I don't have a specific answer to, but.
I'm not sure. Again, go ahead.
The city manager said no.
Oh, okay. So yeah, I know nothing has been done recently. Like as far as like the turf fields, there wasn't
I
any
was on
kind of
the
traffic
original,
plan done there. I don't know if there was something done way back when we acquired the land. I just don't know.
I was on the original committee with Richard Walsh, and the answer is no.
There we go. Hirsch has the answer. Yes.
There you are.
Well, briefly, I'll say for the Keizer ramp, it's kind of connected, but 7, 8, 9 years ago now, I remember when they were redoing that intersection on Shamawa, and was that Shoreline?
Shoreline and Windsor Island.
Depends on which way you go.
So you're heading towards the park, yeah. I had mentioned putting in a traffic circle, and I was told there's not enough traffic there, but
There is now.
there is now, yeah. But that's an aside. That's an I told you so aside. But no, is there a way, you're talking about traffic impact analyses. Is there a way to require a developer to not just have this traffic increase study, but to then demonstrate how are they going to mitigate the
Oh, that's included in.
like basically.
Yeah, that's what the TIA does.
But when I say that, I mean like not saying, so let's just say random big box development generates, we'll just say 100 extra trips a day. How will you develop this in a way that instead of 100 trips a day, it's gonna generate 50 trips a day? Because like Keizer Station's, I think, a great example. If the layout had been done in a way that engendered, one, a connection to the rest of town, but also intra walking travel, traffic probably would be a lot less of an issue in and going into it. So, but they were never asked, how are you going to
Yeah. I
lower the curve of traffic increase?
Yeah, I don't know how to answer that question, Michael. Like, I really don't. I think, you know, I mean, maybe there's a way that you can do that, embed that into a code provision, to look at that. I mean, that obviously would be a little different. It'd be a little bit of a different ballgame. I mean, it would have required a little bit maybe of a policy shift back when that was being done. You know, when Keizer Station was done, a developer approached the city didn't approach the developer.
Right.
So, yeah, I don't know. I mean, it may be possible.
Yeah, because I think, you know, Keizer Station is just the elephant in the room here because it's the biggest thing we've done.
Yeah, no, it's a huge project, and depending on where you sit on the side of things, it may be the greatest thing, and people love it, and other people may hate it. Like, I mean, I know it's you know, I think that it's been wildly successful as far as it's some of the most expensive real estate in town, and it's developed, and you know, whatever, provides services to the community. But yeah, to your point, I mean, I also have talked to planners around the state where they go, "Oh, that's just an auto-centric orientation." Now, I mean, obviously we applied standards for pedestrian amenities. There's a ton of plazas. There's network of paths. But like, I'll go to Keizer Station sometimes and park and walk around because I like to, but there's not a lot of people walking around. Fair, totally fair. Like,
Right.
It's hard to walk after I go to Lowe's.
well, that is, I don't normally walk if I'm going to Lowe's. I have to borrow somebody's truck to go
Well,
there.
that's true, yeah.
So,
Oh, yeah.
One of the things that I've been puzzled about a little bit is looking at the transportation impacts that are somewhat distant from the development. So for example, one that I've recently been kind of becoming more aware of is that with all the development towards the river, off of Windsor Island and towards the river and different things, it means that the traffic pattern on Lock Haven, you have a lot more cars wanting to go straight at Lock Haven and River. And it also blocks then the people who are going to be turning right or left at River, and they back way up on Lock Haven. My question is simply, in developing that far away from
Yeah, yeah.
from the
No, I mean,
transportation thing, how are those
Yeah.
impacts, and where is that addressed?
So, again, from a day-to-day administration of, hey, here's one subdivision that's being developed, we have standards we hold them to. They're clear and objective standards. They have to be. It's kind of like bedded in state law and in lots of lawsuits that have happened when cities try to exact too much or ask for things that aren't justifiable. But realistically, you're talking about kind of cumulative traffic impacts on the overall citywide system that benefits the greater of the city, not necessarily for the per development site. So really, those are supposed to be getting managed through the administration of your transportation system plan. So I'll give you an example because it is near and dear to my heart, and I drove it for years every day going home from work. Our TSP back in 2009 identified that because of traffic backups at the Wheatland split on River Road, where you head to the north, and it backs up, and if you go home at 5 o'clock, if I leave here at 5, which is rare these days, but if I leave here at 5, I now go up River Road because I live on the other side, but when I would go up Wheatland, many times, that turn lane is not big enough to allow the cars to unload and go up Wheatland. And so you have cars that are stacked in the turn lane, out into the other lane, sometimes all the way through the intersection of McNair Estates Drive. So the TSP said, hey, there needs to be a realignment of that intersection with some increased spacing, and that really needs to be a double left turn lane at Wheatland in front of the BNS Market to go up north in order for it to handle this. So that was identified in 2009. It is not built. There's challenges with building it because there's not enough space to actually build it. I don't know that it will ever get built. It may be that we look at things a little bit different. You know, one of the things from that state level, and as I said, I'm unsure and I'm not committing to anything, but I'm unsure as to exactly what the state rules mean for us with this next go around of our TSP. I know that they have shifted their focus into things more like vehicle miles traveled and demonstrating reduction in vehicle miles traveled in communities. So people choosing other transportation options, which would speak to greater bus, greater bikes, greater walking, greater multimodal options, as opposed to just the old congestion and level of service of intersections, so how long you're waiting. So I do think it needs to be looked at collectively, but ultimately those kind of things, those aggregated, this small one, this small one, this small one, if your TSP identifies correctly how the future is going to look, that theoretically can be baked into, hey, this project is going to be needed in the build out of our community, and these projects equate this many dollars, and then you create a capital improvement projects list, and that drives what your SDC charges are for new development. So instead of developers paying for an improvement offsite, they pay for a share of that improvement offsite. And so those are all things that are going to be getting looked at in the next couple of years as we do this update. And it's hard because I'm not going to argue that, like, yeah, there's probably things that could have been done with more forethought or done more detailed to plan for some of those things. But it's not that we didn't do it. It's that it's a 2009 document. And honestly, ideally, you'd update a TSP, really like every 10 years or 5 years, not every 20. But they're really expensive projects that are hard to fund and hard to get grants for because most communities want to do them. So.
Any other questions of?
We need to let change.
Yeah, I do want to thank you for coming.
Yeah, it was my pleasure.
My final thought would just be, was it Gil Penalosa, was that his name?
Good job.
Yeah, I guess, whatever we do, however we do traffic or development, think about, would we feel safe having our 8-year-old child or our 80-year-old grandmother
Talking about me again.
walking along that or biking along that?
Sure.
And if we make it safe for them, we make it safe for everybody.
Yeah, and as I said, I would encourage the Traffic Safety Committee, like, if there are things that you have very specific concerns about, I mean, you know my name. I'm pretty easy to find. I'm here all the time. You feel free to reach out. I'm always happy to have a conversation. And if there are things in the development code, I can point you to sections and say, well, here's our standards. If you have suggestions, that might be something that the Traffic Safety Committee wants to make a suggestion to the Planning Commission or to the council to look at. I would say this, I've lived here forever. I raised my kids here. They are young adults now, so I don't worry about them as much because some of them don't live here anymore. But this is my community. I do try to think of those things. The flip side is I have a legal document that binds me to say, hey, when a development comes in, do you meet our standards or do you not? And we've changed the code. I mean, Michael, you were on a planning commission for years. Yeah. Hirsch, you were. I bring you guys text amendments. Yeah. Most of those I brought were things I was bringing because of projects that came out and we found, oh, shoot, there's a problem here. Or there's a property owner that says there's a problem. And so, as those things come up, we do try to be as proactive as we can be. But obviously the more eyes on things, the better, in my opinion. And the other piece is that I don't live in every neighborhood. I don't spend time in every neighborhood. And so, when there's things that are known issues, if there's something structural in the code that needs to be changed, obviously we need to know about that and go, okay, let's look at this and go, is this something we need to change? So just for what it's worth, I'm very open to those things. So thanks for having me.
Yeah, thank you for coming. And,
you bet.
I wish you the best, because I know your job's not easy.
Hey, it's always fun.
Yeah.
All right, thank you.
Okay, so I guess we will move down the list. So there's the project spreadsheet
Can we
review.
skip that till next month?
Well, I was gonna say, I feel like there's probably not much change. Hirsch?
Well, I would like just to give some feedback.
Oh, please.
On the Lock Haven, crossing,
Yes.
I-
Which one?
down by on the school.
But, okay, the school,
I got feedback from the PTC,
PTC,
Parent Teacher Club, the parents, big thumbs up. And Claudia Mendoza, who is the CSOC, kind of the liaison, and the principal, both said, thank you, thank you. Their only concern is, you know, where it is and across the street, and there's a wall there that's Inland Shores, that's where the city bus has a pickup. And they were just wondering, it already is a crosswalk, but they were wondering about that. And that's, you know,
Is it it's not a marked crosswalk?
it's not a marked crosswalk, but because of McClure, there's really no speed there. If anybody's speeding, they're speeding, because it's really a short street. But for the lights and the crossing and stuff, when you have the parents saying, thank you, I thought, so that's one of the projects we've been working on for a while.
Yeah, yeah. So could you remind me, that's not, that's the Lock Haven North at McClure, is that the one you're
Yeah,
talking about?
yep,
Okay.
yep.
Okay. All right, well, great,
So we got some feedback from the users,
awesome, great,
so,
thank you.
but I second.
Yeah, I think in general, these, unless anyone else has an objection, most of these are minute changes, if any, so, we could probably give it a month to.
Yeah, but I thought, while I had the fresh information,
Yeah, Yeah, 'cause you were
Keizer
there.
Elementary is part of our neighborhood association, so
Okay.
they were very appreciative. And I know Tammy likes to make sure that if we get the users' feedback.
I totally agree, because we can have all the great ideas, but if the users don't like it. Okay, well, that'll save us a few moments. Next is committee member input. I will start with this side. David, anything?
I have nothing.
Come on. Brenda?
So I was supposed to contact, McNary about the liaisons. So I contacted Counselor Laura Reed, and she said that they have a process. She asked me if I wanted to take it over, and I said, no, you're doing great. The other thing is, I said that I would look into the city of Salem's greenway that they have set up. And as you might have heard earlier, I didn't get a hold of anybody. The original planner for that section was like 2009, and they progressed towards it. And then I did a little bit more work, like the digging that I've done so far. It can be a part of safe school, routes to safe schools. So there's various angles to end up with a greenway that has a like 20-mile-an-hour speed limit. That's their Maple Winter one also was intended to get pedestrian, biking traffic off the arteries, which is another reason why it's like 2 blocks in from that road. But it was a long-range plan, and nobody's there who started it.
I can give you a name of a person that was very actively involved, Gary Obrey at ODOT. He is the traffic engineer. Him and his wife lived in that neighborhood and were part of the committee. So, Gary Obrey, O-B-R-E-Y.
E-R-Y.
E-R-Y, E-R-Y, thank you.
Yeah, so it just looks like it's part of the long-range planning, and so identifying what roads we want, which is sort of what we were talking about last month. Like, what roads do we want long-range to fit that space? So as they progress with funding, they can prioritize that particular side streets for those Because River Road's never gonna have a safe bike lane.
No.
But 2 blocks in on Rivercrest, it could, or,
And it's already designated as scenic bikeway, so
yeah.
like Sharrows and all that, yeah, good ideas.
And
They, I know from I think the city of Salem one of the, and Shane alluded to it, is part of it is getting it into the TSP or the transportation plan, because then once it's there, then things like safe routes to schools, when funding opportunities like the recent bond and stuff in Salem come to pass, it's easy to get those projects then in and funded. But if they're not in the transportation plan, then you aren't at first base yet.
Right. But, you know, that gets back to kind of what I was trying to say was when something happens to the street or sidewalk, use that as an opportunity to do something else while you're tearing things up. Because it saves money in the long run, right? Instead of having to tear up. Even if it's like a pipe you're putting in the ground or having to replace. That's the time to see, okay, do we need to do anything that might enhance the safety of the street? I know that there is a strong public works overlap, but I don't know. Outside, it seems like it should be not just what the TSP says when you're looking at these projects. It should be trying to save money, basically.
We'll have an opportunity by 26 or 27, he said.
Right, yeah. My thing was, which I haven't done yet, was about the beggar buttons to walk, the crosswalk buttons, about the timing. And I know I'd originally talked about having that delay, and we've talked about that a little bit, but I had another idea, which off the top of my head escapes me. But one thing I have noticed in streets in Keizer is, like, the River Road obviously has the priority certain times of day of the green light compared to the streets that come into it. So you'll see the hand, or the timing down, and then it goes back to the hand again. And it just seems like, why not just have it as the hand until the light actually is ready to change, and then you could do the countdown. Because it just seems like you're telling pedestrians, say you're gonna have to stop. Oh, no, you don't have to stop. But I'm sure there's gotta be some technical fix for that.
Well, the city of Salem runs those.
Right, so that's where I need to call the guy and tell him about that idea and some other things, because I think that's what Mike asked me to do last time. But, David, anything?
Yeah, we had the fire department open house Monday,
Yeah.
well, last week. So last week? Anyway.
Yeah, it was last week.
All right, so we took in $68. Which, for whatever it is, I don't know where the odd dollars came from.
Well, we got
But then
some
some
donations.
people donated more than the helmets cost, and other people couldn't afford it, so we gave it to them. So we got rid of about, I don't know. I know we gave away, without collecting money, about 5 or 6, especially toddler helmets.
I think we did about 30.
Yeah, about 30. So anyway, our total, and then so we deposited that, the total amount of money in our, I love to say, it's in the city's account.
The helmet.
The helmet,
fund.
it's still called the Bikeways donation account or something like that. So we have $393.32, which is about one box of 24 helmets with shipping and so on, which isn't enough to get us through next summer, but which is money-wise. Helmet-wise, we've got, I don't know if I'll give you the numbers, you can just forget about it. 26 toddler, 43 small, 22 medium, 32 large, 17 extra large. So we have about 140 helmets. I took 8 of them and put them in my car. And when people call, I don't want to have to drag Public Works down to the pump house. That's where we keep our helmets, in case you didn't know that. And, so I have to get somebody from Public Works to drive down there and let me in and then wait for me while I do whatever I have to do. So we're okay probably through next spring, at least, the next big event.
So,
Are you saying with the ones we got plus an extra box, that will
No,
go?
no, I'm just saying,
Oh.
no, that's the money. We got money. If we need to buy some helmets next May, we probably could. But we may not need them, it depends. I don't know why. It's really odd. The last time I did an inventory, we had about 30 of everything. So we gave a lot away, we bought equal amounts, but then from like, at the fire department, I think we gave away mostly mediums. It's just, you don't know, where did all these kids come from?
Yeah.
Where the kids come
Yeah.
from with those small heads this time?
Yeah, and then we got some of these toddler kids, yeah. So anyway, we're okay till next May.
Okay, thank you. Bruce?
Special thanks to Brenda and Mary Ann for also helping
Yeah, oh, yeah.
do that event. As far as planning more bike skills and helmet events, already working with both Keizer Elementary and Weddle for something early spring. The fire department would like to do something, but they're working on it. So I think with being on TV tonight, I am again asking for donations for the helmet fund. We are the only city in Oregon that has an ongoing helmet program, and it's relying completely on donations. And we have done rather well since 1997 when it was started. And I think the last time we counted, we had done, well, we could add 35 to that. So 6,035 helmets we've fitted to the kids since the program started. So we've gotten donations from the Rotary Club, et cetera.
ODOT, grants from ODOT.
Which are a little harder to get now.
Yeah, when they did that.
When they did that, the two sanitation companies in Keizer gave us some money. City council beginning of last year, Councilor Kohler kind of challenged them, and we came up with $400 just at one council meeting. So we're open up to the public for any donations. We try to get the best helmets for the price we can, and we've been able to do it since 1997. And special thanks to David. And I too have a handful of helmets in my car because we get called. So I don't have to run over to Public Works, but
All right.
that's it.
Okay, thank you. So for staff report, Mike couldn't make it tonight, so I will read what he had sent to us. There are a few updates from around town. This year's resurfacing project of 11 road sections has been completed. They almost wrapped up their annual catch basin and manhole cleaning for the upcoming rainy season. And there's a new franchise utility called Ziply Fiber installing fiber optic high-speed internet throughout Keizer neighborhoods. So that-
Really?
I'm just reading the paper.
Okay. Well, yeah.
Okay, and so then we will. I know we have this thing. I don't know if you want me to read it about the traffic impact study at the Little League stadium. If you wanted to talk about that, or is
Up
that
the
me?
parking?
Yeah.
Yeah, there's really no study.
Right.
It's just from experience and working here for 13 years, we periodically get called to all the cars parked along the road, but there's just no solution, or nowhere to send them to go, right at the current.
Right.
That was just a response. As far as my activities for the committee-related issues outside of normal patrol is, we've been dealing with the Newburgh, Lock Haven school issue with the U-turns. I've had several focused patrols there. The primary issue we're finding, or I'm finding, is it is a very localized time. It's about 8 o'clock to 8:15, maybe 8:20, and that's it. So you get a chance to contact 2, maybe 3 cars of all of it, if you make a traffic stop. And then it's only a short block from Lock Haven to the entrance into Celtic Way, where you're making traffic stops inside the school property. which we've done. It's actually probably the only way to do it without making more of an issue. But I've, at least the last time I did it was there, the first couple times it was mayhem. I mean, it was literally a traffic stop as fast as you can. A lot of it was just educational, explaining that you have to have visibility for 500 feet to make a U-turn in an intersection, and that one doesn't allow it. The last time I was there, I only saw one car did a U-turn at the location. I don't know if it's the word got out, because that's what I would tell people. It's like, please tell anybody that you know that drives, don't do this. Or on that particular day, I don't know which, maybe the left turn lane didn't back up as much as it traditionally had been. I don't know what the route result was, but yeah, go ahead for feedback.
That's my neighborhood association, and we talked about it last night, and they do believe that the word got out. And the other thing that's happening is the buses are now coming down Newburgh.
They from Lock Haven? I saw a couple come from
Yeah,
Newburgh.
but some of the buses are coming down Newburgh and then going in, which is okay.
Okay.
Yeah, that's not a problem.
Yeah, I'd see them come from behind me up Newburgh towards Lock Haven.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and that's okay.
Okay.
In other words, the school district transportation has kind of remodified their plan so all the buses aren't.
I have joined with the Keizer Police, and me as the contact have joined, we were sought out by the school district on a committee that deals with different parking issues or transportation issues around different schools throughout the Salem Keizer district. They haven't got any direct plans to deal with the school in Keizer yet, but I did mention this issue.
Yeah. And you got a video even.
Yeah, I sent that to them.
Yeah.
That was the one project. The other one, I just finished this week, was the Harmony Road speed study that was requested. I think it came from some members, their residents there, and it came through the mayor and city council. The Harmony Road, we did a study on it about a couple of years ago. The net results of it are about the same. Now, when it was done before, it was with Sergeant Leday. I didn't really get into the numbers, so I delved into these numbers specifically. What I did find is Harmony Road from 14th to Trail, if you want to call it one really long block or maybe the length of 2 blocks, actually has the same, really close to the same traffic volume as Alder Drive, which was quite surprising. I didn't realize it would have that much as Alder from Verda to Cherry. But there's a lot of concentration on the schools, and the result, if you just face value, the average speed is 29 miles an hour. Okay, nothing shocking, right? So 85 percentile or 85% of all cars are at 33 miles an hour or under. Again, not anything real extreme. But what if you start really getting into the far numbers, there were 500 of the total volume, 1% of the cars, so 1 out of every 100, and there was almost 12,000 cars, were over, I misspoke. 5.5% were over 36 miles an hour of all the cars. And then out of those, then 1% of all cars were over 40 miles an hour, and 29 in a week, over a week period, 24/7, were over 46. So for the most part, the average is really low, because when in the flood of the traffic from the school, it lowers the speed. And that's what I've seen when I'm sitting there. They just, inevitably, maybe there's one car and it jams up to where nobody can go fast. But as soon as it starts opening up, then we get some higher speeds. There's just enough of low cars that it keeps the average low. So there is some issues that need to be dealt with. The problem that I see on there is it also tracks time and when these cars go by. And it's throughout the day. It's not like this 1 hour or coupled hours that I can target. It's any day of the week, 8 to 6. you can get 2 or 3 cars in the 40-mile-an-hour range or better. So it makes it really hard to just target and find those particular drivers. I think it goes down to a lot of the times when Lock Haven starts backing up, they'll start cutting through, and there's really no rhyme or reason necessarily when Lock Haven backs up.
That was my observation. I mean, no scientific study behind it, but I have noticed that the traffic on Harmony has been, I live in that general area, and that is much higher than it used to be just a quiet little road.
Harmony does not have sidewalks.
And,
does not.
and my perception was that as Lock Haven has gotten more and more congested, more people are cutting through there. If you're wanting to go north, you can cut through from 14th on Harmony.
I do it on the bike.
And to your topic there on the sidewalks, I was there today, and been there several times during the school let-outs. 3 children were on the road, and they're not really using it. It's the parents that are picking every person up. They're not really walking.
And I would agree with David that the traffic probably, or has shifted to both Mandarin and to Harmony because of not wanting to go all the way to Lock Haven on River Road. So they will come in, or even people from behind the mobile and all that, instead of going on to Lock Haven to get out, they will go through Trail to hit one of those 2 streets just so they can get that much closer to I-5.
Yep. And I've done in the past a survey of sorts on Mandarin, and the volume is less than half of Harmony.
Yeah, I think people see, because you gotta stop at, well, most people stop at the stop sign at Trail and Mandarin. So they figure you gotta stop there, I'll just go to the next stop and I'll be that much closer.
Yep.
Because then Trail, or Harmony does kind of angle towards that intersection just a little bit more, so you're just a little bit closer to getting to I-5.
Yep.
But, yeah.
So on the face value, the speeds and the average 85th percentile, it's really not, but there were still enough cars in the higher speeds that it is a concern.
That's a 30-mile-an-hour speed limit?
25.
25.
There's no side.
And there's no
They're
side
moving
bumps.
pretty, well, 33 then is
33's, I mean, that's 8 miles an hour
over the speed limit.
over the speed limit.
Significant. I mean.
It can be, yes. Once, like, we'll just use, the speed, we talked about it, the radar speed cameras. They, at 11 is where they start writing tickets. So that's where I based my stats, is from 11 and up.
That's a straight shot. Is that a place for like speed humps or some traffic calming type thing or something?
That's a
engineering.
public works issue and
So it's a residential on their list of things. It's not a arterial or a feeder.
no, that would be a residential.
Yeah, so in my mind, that would make it open to something.
I do know if Shoreline had, the flashing surveys and, we had done similar surveys there, with a lot better results than Harmony has. It would be more justified in that kind of a result, than even Shoreline, just because of the volume. It has more volume than Shoreline does.
And I would like to see both, for Shoreline, I'd like to revisit to see that sign, that flashing sign has, staying power, because,
Who's
in,
the Gubster Neighborhood Association?
well, I'm not in the association. but-
Well, they're very active.
No, Shoreline.
But Shoreline is West
North,
Keizer,
West Keizer.
and they're
Yeah.
very pleased with the flasher.
Right, I just want to see, is it going to have staying power? Because you know how things start to fade into the background.
I travel it and it still seems to be effective.
Okay, that's good. But I think David's right, I think, especially because
I think we
Harmony's,
should bring this up next month.
yeah, Harmony's acting like it's not
And
classified.
I would suggest inviting the Gubser neighborhood.
Yeah?
Who lives over there?
I do, but I mean, I don't go to the meetings because I've got so many other meetings. to go to.
I said, do you know who it is?
Oh, yeah, I
Yes,
can
Patty
find, yeah,
Tish.
Patty Tish. Do you have any more?
Nope, that was the bulk of those 2 projects I was working on.
All right, well, thank you. No council liaison this evening, so I guess we don't have anything to say for that. So I will adjourn the meeting at 8:04.
Thank you. How was traffic?